The plasma burns on Captain Sarah Chen's apartment door were still smoking when the Royal Guard kicked it open. She rolled off her couch, hand reaching for the sidearm that wasn't there. Civilian life, she had to remind herself, even as 6 armored figures flooded her living room. Their crystalline armor refracted the afternoon sunlight into razor-thin rainbows across her walls. No weapons drawn. That meant diplomacy. That meant she was already in trouble. "Captain Chen," the lead guard said, voice modulated through the helmet's translator, "you will come. Not a request." Never a request with the Vyeth. Sarah stood slowly, hands visible, mind racing through every first contact protocol she'd memorized during her service years. The Vyeth had been allies for 3 years now, ever since the Treaty of Meridian Gate. Their warriors were legendary. Their royal family was untouchable, and their guards didn't make house calls unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "What's the situation?" Sarah kept her voice level, professional. "The royal children request your presence." Immediately. Royal children, plural. Sarah's pulse quickened. She'd met Vath, diplomats, soldiers, merchants, never royalty. No human had, not since the treaty signing. The Vyeth kept their royal bloodline isolated, protected. For them to be here, in her cramped apartment in the civilian quarter of Station Meridian, "I need to change," Sarah said. "No time. You will come as you are." Sarah glanced down at her coffee-stained shirt and worn pants. Whatever was happening, protocol had already shattered. She grabbed her jacket from the chair and followed the guards into the corridor. Neighbors peered through cracked doors, eyes wide. The guards moved in formation, Sarah at the center, their boots silent despite their bulk. They took her to the station's diplomatic wing, through security checkpoints that opened without question, past human officials who looked as confused as she felt. The receiving hall was empty except for 4 children. Sarah stopped. The guards stepped aside, creating space but maintaining position. The children stood in the center of the polished floor, and even without training, Sarah could see they were Vyeth royalty. Their skin held the characteristic iridescence of highborn genetics, shifting between silver and deep violet. They wore simple travel clothes, but the fabric moved like liquid starlight. The oldest looked perhaps 8 in human years, the youngest barely 4. All 4 watched Sarah with the unnerving intensity that made the Vyeth such effective strategists. The smallest one pointed directly at Sarah's chest. The guards tensed. Sarah saw it in the minute shift of their shoulders, the way their hands drifted closer to their weapons. Whatever the child was doing, it meant something. Something significant enough to make veteran warriors nervous. "Princess Naivra," the lead guard said quietly. "Please lower your hand." Her finger remained extended, steady as a rifle sight. Her eyes, black with rings of gold, never left Sarah's face. The other 3 children moved closer to their sister, forming a protective semicircle. The oldest placed a hand on Naivira's shoulder, but the small princess didn't waver. Sarah's throat went dry. She'd faced enemy fire with more composure, but this was different. This was a child making some kind of accusation or declaration, and Sarah had no context, no protocol, no idea what response would prevent an interstellar incident. She stood perfectly still, hands at her sides, and waited. "You wear the mark," Naivra said. Her voice was clear, precise, speaking Terran standard with barely an accent. "The blood debt mark. You carry the name of the fallen." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her left forearm, where the tattoo lived beneath her jacket sleeve, the memorial ink she'd gotten after the Battle of Callisto Ridge. 23 names. 23 soldiers who died under her command when the mission went wrong, when her decisions led them into an ambush. She'd resigned her commission 6 months later, unable to carry the weight of leadership anymore. "I don't understand," Sarah said carefully. The oldest princess stepped forward. "I am Velissa. We have studied human customs. Memorial tattoos mark those who have survived when others have fallen. Our records show you commanded during the Callisto Ridge engagement. Your soldiers died protecting a Vyeth colony ship."
You saved 4,000 of our people."
Sarah felt the floor tilt slightly. She'd known the ship was there. It had been part of the mission brief, a secondary objective. But during the chaos of the ambush, she'd redirected her forces to hold the line long enough for the colony ship to break orbit. She'd lost most of her squad doing it. The official report called it a tactical victory. Sarah had called it a failure. "My soldiers made that choice," Sarah said quietly. "I just gave the orders that got them killed." Nevera's hand trembled, but didn't lower. "Our mother was on that ship, Queen Saveth. She was touring the colony settlements when the attack came. You saved the Queen's life." "You saved all our lives." The small princess's voice cracked. The blood debt belongs to us. We owe you a life debt that can never be repaid. The guards hadn't moved, but Sarah could feel the weight of their attention. Life debt. She knew the term from cultural briefings. The Vythe held debts of honor as sacred, binding across generations. If the royal family believed they owed her, where is your mother now? Sarah asked. The question came from instinct, from years of reading tactical situations. 4 children unaccompanied by adult royalty, surrounded by guards who looked ready to bolt. Something was wrong. Valissa's expression hardened in a way no 8-year-olds should. That is why we came to you, Captain Chen. Our mother is dying, and we need you to help us save her. The words hung in the air like a detonation countdown. Sarah's mind spun through implications, political upheaval, succession crises, potential war if the Queen's death was anything but natural. The guards were watching her now, waiting for her response. The children stood together, royal bearing barely masking their desperation. Sarah had walked away from command. She'd sworn she'd never be responsible for lives again, never make another decision that could end in death. But 4 children were standing in front of her asking for help, and somewhere nearby a queen was dying. The woman whose life Sarah had saved 3 years ago without even knowing it. "Tell me everything," Sarah said. Valisse led Sarah through the diplomatic wing into a sealed medical bay that shouldn't have existed on a civilian station. The guards followed at a distance, giving space but never truly leaving. The other princesses walked close to their older sister, Nevera, still watching Sarah with those intense gold-ringed eyes, the middle 2 children silent and pale. The medical bay was full of equipment Sarah didn't recognize. Crystalline constructs humming with energy, displays showing biological data in Vythe script that scrolled too fast to read. In the center, on a raised platform surrounded by monitoring devices, Queen Scifi lay motionless. Sarah had never seen a Vythe monarch. The images from the treaty signing had been distant, formal. Up close, Scifi was smaller than Sarah expected, her iridescent skin now muted, fading toward gray. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Medical staff moved around her with practiced efficiency, but Sarah could see the defeat in their movements. They were maintaining, not healing. 4 days ago, she collapsed during a state dinner, Valisse said. Her voice was steady, controlled, but her hands were clenched tight. The physicians say it's neural cascade failure. Her synaptic pathways are degrading. They've tried every treatment. Nothing works. The princess turned to Sarah. They say she has perhaps 3 days remaining. Maybe less. I'm not a doctor, Sarah said gently. I don't understand why you think I can help. Nevera pushed forward, standing between Sarah and her older sister. Because you have the mark. Because the blood debt creates a connection. Vythe biology responds to intention, to purpose, to bonds of honor. Our mother's body is failing because her consciousness has no anchor. She's letting go. The small princess's eyes glistened. But she owes you a life debt. If you claim it, if you demand she honor it, her body will remember. It will fight. Sarah looked at the medical staff, searching for confirmation or denial. The head physician, a tall Vowith with deep purple skin, stepped forward. The princess speaks truth, though simplified. Queen Savith's neural patterns show signs of voluntary cessation. In your terms, she's chosen to die. We cannot find the cause, no poison or disease, just a decision made at a level below consciousness. Life debt bonds exist in our deep brain structures, precognitive, survival level imperative. If she perceives an unpaid debt, it may override the cessation response. May? Sarah repeated. You're not certain. Nothing is certain, Captain. But our queen is dying and we have exhausted medical options. This is our last possibility. Sarah moved closer to the platform. Savith's face was peaceful, almost serene. No sign of pain or struggle. Just a slow fade toward nothing. Sarah had seen death before, violent and sudden. This was different. This looked almost voluntary, almost like surrender. Why would she choose this? Sarah asked. The medical bay fell silent. The staff exchanged glances. Valisse opened her mouth, closed it, looked to the physician. The older Vythe sighed, a sound like wind through crystals. Because she believes she has failed, the physician said quietly. The queen has ruled for 60 cycles. She has guided our people through first contact, through alliance, through peace. But 3 weeks ago, intelligence reports confirmed that the Craven Swarm has begun moving toward our border systems, the same enemy that attacked Callisto Ridge. The same enemy she barely escaped. He gestured to the monitors. The Queen believes war is inevitable. She believes she cannot protect her people, cannot protect her children, and so her body has begun shutting down under the weight of perceived failure. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew that feeling. The weight of responsibility becoming unbearable, the moment when continuing felt harder than stopping. She'd felt it after Callisto Ridge, when the names of the dead had piled up in her mind until she couldn't function. She'd resigned instead of dying, but the impulse had been there. "Can I speak to her?" Sarah asked. The physician shook his head. "She's non-responsive. Her consciousness has retreated too deep. We cannot reach her with words or stimulation. Only a life-debt imperative might penetrate far enough. How do I claim it?" Nivra took Sarah's hand. The child's skin was warm, slightly textured like fine scales. "You speak the words of binding. You state what she owes you. You make the debt real and immediate. But Captain Chen," the princess squeezed tighter, "you must mean it. You cannot lie. Our biology knows intention. If you speak words without belief, it will fail." Sarah looked down at the small princess, then at the 3 other children watching her with desperate hope, at the queen lying still on the platform, at the guards standing ready for orders that might never come. She thought about Callisto Ridge, about the weight of command, about the 23 names tattooed on her arm, about the 4,000 lives she'd saved without knowing, including these 4 children and their mother. She'd run from responsibility for 3 years. Told herself she couldn't be trusted with lives anymore. But here were 5 lives depending on her, 4 children and a queen who'd given up under the same weight Sarah had carried. Sarah stepped closer to the platform. The medical staff moved aside, creating space. She placed her hand on Saveth's forearm, feeling the faint pulse beneath the cooling skin. The queen didn't respond. "Queen Saveth," Sarah said clearly. "I am Captain Sarah Chen, formerly of the Terran Defense Force. 3 years ago my soldiers died protecting your ship at Callisto Ridge. You survived because of their sacrifice, because of my orders." She paused, finding the words, finding the truth beneath them. "You owe me a debt, Your Majesty. You owe me your life, and I'm here to claim it." Nothing happened. The monitors continued their steady decline. The medical staff watched silently. Felice moved closer to her sisters, gathering them together. Sarah tightened her grip. "I'm not done, Saveth. You think you can give up? You think you can abandon your children because you're afraid of what's coming? I lost 23 people at Callisto Ridge, 23 soldiers who trusted me to bring them home. I carry their names on my skin every day. I know what failure feels like." Her voice hardened. "But you don't get to quit. Not when your daughters are standing here terrified. Not when your people need you. You owe me your life, and I'm telling you to fight. That's the debt. That's what I'm claiming. You will fight." The monitors fluctuated. A spike in neural activity, small but present. The physician leaned forward, adjusting controls. Sarah kept her hand on Saveth's arm, kept her eyes on the queen's face. "I saved you once without knowing it," Sarah continued. "My soldiers died for you, and you're going to honor that sacrifice by living, by being the queen your children need, by facing the Craven Swarm or whatever else comes and not backing down. That's the life debt. That's what you owe." She leaned closer, dropping her voice to something fierce and low. "Get up, Saveth. Your daughters need you. I need you to prove that Callisto Ridge meant something. Get up." Saveth's eyes opened. The change was sudden, startling. One moment peaceful unconsciousness, the next full awareness. The queen's eyes were black with golden rings, exactly like her youngest daughter's. They focused on Sarah with sharp intensity. "Captain Chen." Saveth's voice was hoarse, weak, but absolutely present. "You claim the life debt?" "I do," Sarah said firmly. "Then I am bound to honor it." The queen's hand moved slowly, covering Sarah's. "I hear your demand. I will fight." The monitors surged with activity. The medical staff rushed forward, adjusting equipment, calling out readings in Vieth that Sarah couldn't follow. But she could see the change. Color returning to Saveth's skin, breathing deepening, strength flowing back. The physician was speaking rapidly, excited, disbelieving. 4 princesses crowded around the platform. Nivra was crying, silent tears tracking down her iridescent cheeks. Felice held her sisters close, her controlled expression finally cracking into something that looked like relief. The middle 2 children reached for their mother's other hand, holding on tight. Saveth's eyes never left Sarah's face. "You saved me again, Captain. Twice now you have pulled me from death. The debt deepens." "No," Sarah said quietly. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you why you should." The queen's grip tightened fractionally. I felt myself fading, felt the weight of what approaches. "The Craven Swarm will reach our borders within months. War is coming, and I did not believe I could lead my people through it. I did not believe I could protect them. Her gaze shifted to her daughters. I did not believe I could keep them safe. You can't, Sarah said bluntly. The medical staff looked shocked.
Phyllis stiffened.
But Sarah continued, meeting the Queen's eyes directly. You can't guarantee their safety. No leader can. I couldn't keep my soldiers safe at Callisto Ridge, but I could give them purpose, direction, a chance to fight for something that mattered. That's what leaders do. We don't promise victory. We give people something worth fighting for. Savith studied her in silence. Then, slowly, the Queen smiled. It was a tired expression, marked with pain and exhaustion, but genuine. You speak with the certainty of experience, with the weight of command still on your shoulders, whether you acknowledge it or not. She glanced at the physician. How long until I can stand? Your Majesty, you should rest for at least... How long? The physician sighed. An hour, perhaps. Your neural pathways are reintegrating, but the process needs time to stabilize. Rushing could cause relapse. Then I will rest for 1 hour. Savith looked at Sarah. And then you and I will speak about the Craven Swarm. Because if you truly claim this life debt, Captain Shen, then you have bound yourself to my survival. And my survival is now tied to the survival of my people. You cannot save one without the other. Sarah felt the trap close around her. Clever. The Queen had turned the life debt into a chain that pulled both ways. Sarah had demanded Savith fight. Now she'd have to help her do it. She should have felt manipulated, angry. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Purpose. 1 hour, Sarah agreed. Then we talk strategy. The guards escorted Sarah to a waiting room adjacent to the medical bay. It was furnished in Vaeth style. Minimal, crystalline, beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah sat on a bench that adjusted to her body weight and tried to process what had just happened. She'd walked into her apartment planning a quiet evening. Now she was bound by life debt to an alien queen, potentially involved in an interstellar war, and somehow responsible for 4 royal children who looked at her like she was a miracle. Nivevra appeared in the doorway. No guards accompanied her. The small princess moved with careful deliberation, climbing onto the bench beside Sarah. They sat in silence for a moment. Thank you, Nivra said finally, for bringing our mother back. She came back on her own, Sarah said. I just gave her a reason to. You gave her purpose. Nivri swung her legs, too short to reach the floor. Valis reads the intelligence reports. She sneaks into Mother's office and studies the tactical assessments. She says the Craven Swarm is different than other enemies. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat.
They consume everything in their path. The princess looked up at Sarah.
Are you afraid? Sarah considered lying, offering comfort. But Nivera had those sharp, knowing eyes. She deserved honesty. Yes, Sarah said. I'm terrified. The Craven don't fight like rational actors. They're a biological imperative wearing ships. Everything I learned about tactics and strategy becomes questionable when the enemy doesn't care about survival. Then why did you tell Mother to fight them? Because the alternative is surrender. And surrender to the Craven means extinction. Sarah met the child's gaze. Your mother was choosing slow death over leading her people through hard times. I understand that impulse. It's easier to give up than to face impossible odds, but her people deserve better. You deserve better. So she has to try, even if trying means risk and pain and possible failure. Nivra nodded slowly. You lost your soldiers at Callisto Ridge. Did that make you want to give up? Yes, Sarah admitted. I resigned my commission because I couldn't trust myself anymore. Couldn't face the possibility of making another decision that ended in death. I ran from responsibility. But you came back today, when we needed help. I came back for 4 children and their mother. That's different than commanding troops in battle. Is it? Nivra tilted her head. You made a decision that determined whether Mother lived or died, whether we would be orphans. That seems like command to me. Sarah didn't have an answer for that. The princess was right, and the truth was uncomfortable. She told herself she was done with leadership, but the moment someone needed her, she'd stepped back into that role without hesitation. Maybe she'd never really left it. Maybe resignation was just another form of retreat. The hour passed. The physician appeared to escort Sarah back to the medical bay. Saveth was sitting upright now, colorfully restored, surrounded by advisors and military staff who must have arrived during Sarah's absence. The queen wore a formal robe that caught the light, transforming her from patient to monarch in moments. But her eyes were tired, and Sarah could see the effort it took to maintain composure. "Captain Chen," Saveth said formally. "Thank you for attending. We have matters to discuss." The advisors made space. Sarah noticed that the 4 princesses had been moved to the side of the room, close enough to hear but separated from the tactical discussion. Valissa watched everything with intense focus. The other 3 stayed close to their oldest sister. A holographic display activated above the platform showing the star map. Red markers indicated Craven fleet positions advancing in a steady line toward Vaeth space. Numbers scrolled beside each marker, estimated ship counts, projected arrival times, resource consumption rates. Sarah studied the data with the eye of a military strategist, and what she saw made her blood run cold. "They're not raiding," Sarah said. "This is a full migration. They've exhausted their current territory and they're moving to new feeding grounds." "Correct," said one of the military advisors, a scarred Vaeth with silver skin. "Our intelligence suggests they've consumed 3 minor systems already. Nothing remains but stripped worlds and debris. They're heading toward our most populated colonies. Contact is estimated in 72 days. Sarah did the math quickly. "Your fleet can't evacuate that many people in time, and you can't defend effectively against those numbers with current force deployment. You're looking at massive civilian casualties regardless of your tactical choices." The room fell silent. Saveth leaned forward slightly. "You see the dilemma. Every option leads to death. Every decision I make will result in my people suffering. That is why I began to fade, Captain. How does one lead when all paths end in tragedy?" "You choose the path that saves the most lives," Sarah said immediately, "even if it means sacrificing others, even if it haunts you forever. That's the burden of command." She moved closer to the hologram, studying the fleet positions. "But you're also missing options. You're thinking defensively. The Craven don't expect resistance, they expect prey. That's an advantage if you're willing to use it." "Explain," Saveth commanded. Sarah pointed to a cluster of red markers. "The Craven move in feeding patterns. They send scout swarms ahead to identify viable targets, then the main fleet follows to consume. The scouts are relatively small, maybe 30 ships each. The main fleet is massive, but slow. It has to process resources as it moves. That creates a gap, temporal and spatial, between the scouts and the fleet." She traced a line on the hologram. "If you hit the scouts hard and fast, you can disrupt their intelligence gathering, make them uncertain, force the main fleet to slow down while they reassess." The military advisor leaned in, intrigued. That would buy time. "But attacking the scouts means committing our forces to offensive operations. It risks leaving our colonies undefended." "Your colonies are already at risk," Sarah countered. "Defensive positions against the Craven are death traps. They'll just overwhelm your shields with sheer mass. But a mobile strike force that keeps them guessing, that forces them to split attention, that changes the equation. You turn their biological imperative against them, they'll have to respond to threats instead of just advancing on autopilot." Saveth studied the hologram, then looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. "You propose we become predators rather than prey. Aggressive defense rather than fortification." "I propose you survive," Sarah said, "which means making hard choices and accepting calculated risks. It means some of your people will die regardless of what you do, but you give the rest a chance." She paused. "And you demonstrate to the Craven that Veth territory isn't easy feeding. Even if you can't stop them entirely, you can make them decide the cost is too high and redirect to softer targets." One of the advisors spoke up, voice sharp. "You suggest we redirect this threat toward other civilizations? That is not honorable." "Honor doesn't matter to the Craven," Sarah said flatly. "They're not a civilization, they're a plague. And plagues go where resistance is weakest. If you make yourselves expensive, they'll look elsewhere. If that makes you uncomfortable, then you'd better be prepared to die for your principles, because the Craven won't care either way." The room erupted in argument. Some advisors supported Sarah's approach, others called it cowardly or dishonorable. Saveth listened to all of it, silent and still. Finally, she raised one hand, and the room fell quiet. "Captain Chen speaks harsh truth," the Queen said. "Truths I did not want to acknowledge. We are not facing an enemy that respects honor or negotiates for peace. We are facing survival imperative in its rawest form. And if we are to survive, we must be equally pragmatic." She looked at Sarah directly. "I accept your strategic assessment. We will prepare offensive strike forces to harass the Craven scouts. But I need more than strategy from you, Captain. I need you to lead them." Sarah stepped back. I'm not Vaith military. I have no authority to. You have my authority, Saveth interrupted. You claimed the life debt. You demanded I fight. Now I'm fighting, and I'm telling you that my survival depends on this strategy working. Therefore, your debt demands you ensure its success. You will coordinate the strike forces. You will teach my commanders how humans fought at Callisto Ridge. You will help us survive. The Queen's expression softened slightly. Please, Captain Chen, I am asking. Sarah looked at the hologram at the advancing red markers that represented death and destruction. She looked at the Vaeth military staff, many of whom were clearly skeptical about taking orders from a human. She looked at the four princesses watching from the side of the room, Niver's golden eyes wide with hope. She'd run from this. She'd spent 3 years telling herself she couldn't be responsible for lives anymore, couldn't make the decisions that led to death. But the deaths were coming whether she helped or not. The only question was whether she'd stand aside and let it happen, or step forward and maybe, possibly make a difference. 23 names on her arm. 23 people who died following her orders. She'd added them to her skin as punishment, as a reminder, as monument to her failure. But maybe they were also a reminder of what leadership actually meant. Not preventing all deaths, just fighting like hell to save who you could. I'll do it, Sarah said, but I have conditions. First, I want full tactical authority over the strike forces. No political interference, no second-guessing from advisors. If I'm responsible for the outcome, I make the calls. Second, I want complete intelligence access. Everything you know about the Craven, no restrictions. Third, she looked at Saveth directly. If this goes wrong, if my decisions lead to massive casualties, you don't blame yourself. You gave me command. That makes the outcome mine. I won't have you fading away again because of choices I made. Agreed? Saveth smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You are already thinking like a commander again, Captain. Claiming authority, accepting responsibility, protecting those under your care. Yes, I agree to all your conditions. She stood, and everyone in the room straightened instinctively. Captain Sarah Chen, I hereby appoint you Strategic Commander of the Vaeth Defense Initiative. You will coordinate all military operations related to the Craven threat. My forces are yours to command. The military advisor who'd questioned Sarah earlier stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart in salute. The gesture was repeated throughout the room. Sarah had seen Vaeth military protocol during joint operations, but receiving it herself felt surreal. She returned the salute automatically, years of training taking over. When do we start? Sarah asked. Immediately, Saveth said. The Craven scouts will reach the outer colonies in 72 days. We have perhaps 60 days to organize, train, and deploy the strike forces before our window closes. Admiral Keltar will serve as your second-in-command and handle the practical military coordination. You will focus on strategy and tactical innovation. The Queen moved closer, lowering her voice so only Sarah could hear. And Captain? Thank you for giving me purpose when I had lost it. For reminding me that leadership is not about preventing all suffering, but about fighting for those we can save. I will not forget that lesson. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The weight of command settled back onto her shoulders. Familiar, heavy, terrifying. But this time it came with something else. Not just responsibility, but purpose. Not just burden, but meaning. She'd spent 3 years running from this feeling. Now, standing in a medical base surrounded by alien warriors preparing for war, she finally understood what she'd been missing. The next 60 days became a blur of activity. Sarah worked 18-hour cycles, coordinating with Vaeth military leadership to redesign their tactical doctrine. The Vaeth were excellent defenders, disciplined, strategic, patient. But they'd never fought an enemy like the Craven, and their instincts kept pushing them toward fortification rather than aggression. Sarah broke those instincts systematically. She drew on every lesson from Callisto Ridge, every mistake she'd made, every successful engagement she'd studied. She taught them hit-and-run tactics, taught them to think like guerrillas instead of soldiers. The Vaeth fleet was smaller than the Craven swarm, but faster, more maneuverable. Sarah designed strike patterns that exploited that advantage. Rapid insertions, precision targeting, immediate extraction. Admiral Keltar proved invaluable. The scarred warrior had doubted Sarah initially, but he learned fast and implemented her strategies with ruthless efficiency. Together they assembled 4 strike forces, each commanded by experienced Vaeth captains willing to trust human tactical doctrine. Sarah personally briefed each captain, walked them through scenarios, drilled them until the new patterns became instinct. The princesses visited often. Valis observed every briefing, absorbing tactical information with the focus of a future queen. Nivra asked endless questions about human military history, about famous battles, about what made certain commanders successful. The middle two, Sareen and Velith, were quieter, but they watched everything, listened carefully. Sarah found herself teaching more than tactics. She taught them about leadership, about making hard choices, about carrying the weight of responsibility. Savith recovered slowly but steadily. The queen attended strategic meetings, providing political context and resources, but she deferred to Sarah on all tactical matters, keeping her word about non-interference. In quieter moments, they talked about command, about the burden of making life-and-death decisions. Savith had ruled for 60 cycles, guided her people through peace and prosperity. But war was different, and she relied on Sarah's experience to navigate it. On the 45th day, the first scout swarm was detected entering the outer colonies. Sarah's strike forces were ready. The first engagement happened near a mining colony called Velkara. The Craven Scout Swarm, 34 ships moving in tight formation, approached the planet expecting no resistance. They found 4 Vaeth warships waiting in ambush, positioned using gravity wells to mask their signatures. Sarah watched from the command center as the strike force followed her doctrine perfectly. Concentrated fire on the lead ships, disrupting the swarm's coordination, then rapid extraction before the Craven could respond effectively. The strike forces destroyed 8 scout ships and damaged 12 more before retreating. The Craven tried to pursue, but the Vaeth ships were already gone, jumping to pre-calculated positions light years away. It wasn't a decisive victory. The Craven could absorb those losses easily, but it was a message. Vaeth territory fights back. Over the next 20 days, Sarah orchestrated 17 more strikes. The pattern was always the same, quick, brutal, then gone before the Craven could coordinate counterattacks. The scout swarms grew cautious, started moving slower, began grouping together for mutual protection. Exactly what Sarah wanted. Caution meant delay. Delay meant time, but the main fleet kept advancing. The red markers on the hologram moved steadily forward, and Sarah's projections showed they'd reach the primary colonies in 18 days. The strikes had bought time, created uncertainty, but they hadn't stopped the advance. Sarah ran simulations constantly, searching for a way to achieve more than just harassment. On the 58th day, Nivra found her in the tactical center at 3 a.m. station time. Sarah was reviewing fleet dispositions, trying to find some pattern or weakness she'd missed. The young princess climbed into the chair beside Sarah's workstation. "You haven't slept," Nivra observed. "Sleep is a luxury we can't afford right now," Sarah said absently, highlighting a section of the hologram. "Mother says you're pushing too hard. She's worried you'll collapse like she did." Sarah looked at the child. Nievra's gold-ringed eyes were serious, concerned. Sarah realized the princess was right. She'd been functioning on stimulants and adrenaline for days. But every hour she spent resting was an hour the Craven grew closer. "I'll sleep when we found a solution," Sarah said. "What if there isn't one?" Nivra asked quietly. "What if all we can do is delay them and hope they eventually move on?" Sarah wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but Nievra deserved truth. "Then we've bought your people time to evacuate the primary colonies. Maybe saved a few million lives, maybe demonstrated to other civilizations how to resist. It's not victory, but it's not nothing. Is that enough for you?" Sarah sat back, rubbing her eyes. "No, I want to stop them completely. I want to find the perfect strategy that ends this threat and saves everyone, but I'm not sure that solution exists. The Craven are too massive, too relentless. We're mosquitoes fighting a flood." Nivra was silent for a long moment, then she pointed at Sarah's arm. "Your memorial tattoo, the 23 names. You carry them because you couldn't save them. But how many did you save at Callisto Ridge? How many besides Mother and my sisters and me?" Sarah had to think about it. The official count had been listed in the after-action report. The colony ship had 4,172 people aboard. Plus my surviving squad members, 5 soldiers made it out. So 4,177 lives. That's a lot more than 23. But you only remember the ones you lost. Nivra looked at the hologram, at the red markers representing the Craven advance. Maybe you can't stop them completely. Maybe some people will die no matter what you do, but you're already saving others. Every strike buys time for evacuations. Every delay lets families escape. You're saving lives, Captain Chen. You're just not counting them. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on finding the perfect solution, on stopping the Craven entirely, that she'd missed the bigger picture. The evacuations happening in the outer colonies, the families relocated to safer systems, the millions of lives that continued because the Craven had been slowed just enough to matter. She couldn't save everyone, but she was saving someone, and that had to be enough. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "You're a wise kid, you know that?" Naivra smiled. "I have a good teacher." The next morning, Sarah called a full strategic meeting. Saveth, the military advisors, the strike force captains, Admiral Keltar, everyone involved in the defense initiative. Sarah stood before the hologram showing Craven fleet positions and made her assessment. "We can't stop them," Sarah said bluntly. "Even with perfect tactics and unlimited resources, the Craven fleet is too large. We're looking at a migration, not an invasion. They're going to move through this region of space regardless of resistance. What we can do is minimize casualties and make the cost so high they choose different paths for future expansion." Some of the advisors looked stricken. Others nodded, clearly having reached the same conclusion, but unwilling to say it aloud. Saveth remained composed, watching Sarah carefully. "Our objective is no longer stopping the Craven," Sarah continued. "It's surviving them and demonstrating that Vayeth space is expensive territory. To that end, I'm proposing a multi-phase withdrawal strategy. We evacuate the outer colonies completely. They're indefensible against the main fleet. We consolidate defensive forces around the core worlds, creating hardened positions the Craven will have to spend significant resources to crack. And we continue strike operations against their scout swarms, maintaining pressure and preventing them from establishing easy feeding patterns." Sarah highlighted several systems on the hologram. "These core worlds have natural defensive advantages, gravity wells, asteroid fields, stellar phenomena we can use. We turn them into fortresses and make the Craven bleed for every meter. The outer colonies get stripped regardless, but we save the majority of the population and demonstrate that pushing further into Vayeth space will be costly. Eventually, the Craven will calculate that easier prey exists elsewhere and redirect. We don't win. We just survive long enough to stop losing." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Admiral Keltar spoke up. "It is a strategy of managed retreat and calculated sacrifice. It acknowledges limitations while maximizing salvageable outcomes. I support this approach." Other commanders voiced agreement. The political advisors looked less certain. Abandoning territory went against every instinct. But Saveth rose, and everyone's attention shifted to the Queen. "Captain Chen has provided an honest assessment," Saveth said. "She has acknowledged what I was unwilling to face, that some battles cannot be won, only endured. I approve this strategy. Begin evacuation operations immediately. Prepare the core worlds for siege defense. And continue the strike operations. We will make the Craven remember Vayeth resistance. We will survive this migration, and we will ensure our people have a future, even if it is built on the ashes of our outer colonies." The command went out. Over the next 12 days, the Vayeth military executed the largest evacuation in their history. Millions of civilians relocated from the outer colonies to the core worlds. Some went to Allied systems, accepted as refugees. It was chaotic, heartbreaking, imperfect, but it worked. By the time the main Craven fleet reached the outer colonies, they found minimal population, stripped infrastructure, and nothing worth the energy of detailed consumption. The strike forces continued their harassment. Sarah rotated them carefully, ensuring no single unit stayed in combat too long. The Craven scouts learned to expect resistance, started moving in larger groups, wasted resources on defensive formations. The main fleet advanced, but slower than their biological imperative demanded. They were being cautious. That caution was costing them time and energy. On the 74th day, the Craven main fleet reached the first core world, Velcora Prime, a heavily populated planet with extensive orbital defenses. Sarah watched from the command center as the engagement began. The Craven sent swarm after swarm against the orbital platforms, trying to overwhelm through sheer numbers. The Vayeth defenders held position, used overlapping fire zones, exploited every defensive advantage Sarah had mapped. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Craven had taken the outer orbital platforms, but at massive cost. Hundreds of their ships destroyed. The deeper defenses still held. And the Craven fleet began repositioning, clearly reassessing whether Velcora Prime was worth the continued expenditure. "They're slowing," Admiral Keltar said, studying the tactical displays. "The resistance is exceeding their cost-benefit calculations." Sarah nodded. "Now we maintain pressure. Keep the strike forces active. Make them wonder if every system will be this expensive. If we're lucky, they'll decide to route around to the core worlds entirely." They weren't that lucky. The Craven pressed the attack on Velcora Prime for another 3 days before pulling back. They'd taken the outer orbital defenses but left the planet itself untouched. Too much energy required for the return. Sarah had been right. The Craven would feed where resistance was minimal. Vyeth's determination made them expensive prey. The main fleet began shifting course, moving toward less defended regions of space. Some of those regions contained minor civilizations, human colonies, independent settlements. The Craven would consume them instead. Sarah felt the weight of that calculation, knowing her strategy was redirecting death toward others. But the alternative was Vyeth extinction, and she'd been hired to prevent that. The princesses understood. Valis especially, studying the strategic maps with the same grim calculations Sarah employed. The future queen was learning the hardest lesson of leadership, that sometimes survival requires impossible choices. On the 81st day, the Craven main fleet left Vyeth space entirely, heading toward easier targets. Sarah's strike forces conducted one final harassment operation, destroying a Craven scout swarm near the border. A message: we're still here. We're still dangerous. Remember that. The command center erupted in restrained celebration. Advisors congratulated each other. Commanders reported casualty figures and infrastructure losses, but underneath the grim numbers was relief. They'd survived. The Vedet people continued. Not intact, not unscathed. Savith found Sarah in the tactical center after the celebrations had quieted. The queen looked exhausted but whole, her iridescent skin bright with health and determination. She stood beside Sarah's workstation, looking at the hologram showing the Craven fleet's new course. "We survived," Savith said quietly, "because of you." "You survived because your people fought like hell," Sarah corrected. "I just gave them a plan. You gave us more than that. You gave me purpose when I had none. You taught my commanders to think like predators. You showed my daughter what leadership actually means." Savith placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The life debt is paid, Captain Chen. You have ensured my survival and the survival of my people. You are released from your obligation." Sarah looked at the Queen, then at the hologram. The Craven were heading towards human colonies now, toward Earth Alliance territory, toward people who might not have the defensive infrastructure or tactical preparation to survive first contact. She thought about the 4,000 lives she'd saved at Callisto Ridge without knowing, about the millions she'd saved here by buying time and teaching resistance. "What if I don't want to be released?" Sarah asked. Savith tilted her head, curious. "Explain. The Craven are heading toward human space. Earth Alliance military doctrine is even more defensive than yours was. They'll try to fortify positions and fight conventionally. It'll be a massacre unless someone teaches them what we've learned here." Sarah gestured at the hologram. "I could go back to Earth Alliance Command, brief them on Craven tactics, help them prepare. But that means leaving here. Leaving your people. Leaving," she paused, "leaving your daughters, who I've been teaching. Leaving you when you're still rebuilding. I'm not sure I want to do that." Savith studied her for a long moment. "You have found purpose again. Not obligation or duty, but genuine purpose. You want to keep fighting, keep teaching, keep making a difference?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I spent 3 years running from responsibility, telling myself I wasn't fit for command. But these last 80 days, I felt alive again. Useful. Like my experience and my failures actually mean something. I don't want to stop." The Queen smiled. "Then don't. Stay with us. Help us rebuild. Teach the next generation of Vyeth's commanders. And when the Craven inevitably return, as migrations always circle back, you'll be here to help us survive again." She paused. "Besides, my daughters have become quite attached to their teacher. Nevevra asks for you constantly. Valis models her tactical thinking after yours. You have become part of our family, Captain. We would be honored if you remained." Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen. Family. She'd lost that 3 years ago when her squad died, when she resigned, when she retreated into isolation. But here, surrounded by aliens planning defense against existential threats, she'd found it again. 4 children who looked at her with trust and admiration. A queen who treated her as equal.
Warriors who followed her leadership without hesitation.
"I'll stay," Sarah said, "on one condition. You stop calling me Captain. I'm not military anymore. Just Sarah." Saveth laughed, the sound like wind chimes. "Very well, Sarah. Welcome to the family." The princesses arrived moments later, clearly having been waiting nearby. Nyvera launched herself at Sarah, wrapping small arms around her waist. Valis maintained more composure, but her smile was genuine. Saren and Velith clustered close, touching Sarah's arm shyly. "You're staying?" Neva asked hopefully. "I'm staying," Sarah confirmed. "Someone needs to make sure you learn proper tactics. Can't have future queens making rookie mistakes." Valis straightened proudly. "We will be excellent students. We will learn everything you can teach us." Sarah looked at the four princesses, at the queen watching with obvious affection, at the tactical displays showing a universe still full of threats and challenges. She thought about the 23 names on her arm, about Callisto Ridge, about the weight of command she'd tried to escape. She realized now that the weight had never been punishment. It had been purpose all along. She'd saved the queen twice, saved millions more, taught an entire military force how to survive impossible odds, and now she'd help raise the next generation of leaders who would face whatever came next. Not because of obligation or life debt or duty, but because it mattered. Because she mattered. Because leadership wasn't about preventing all deaths. It was about fighting like hell to save who you could and teaching others to do the same. 3 years ago, Sarah Chen had lost 23 soldiers and thought she'd lost herself. Today, she'd finally found her way back. Not to who she'd been, but to who she was meant to become. A teacher. A strategist. A guardian for those who needed protection. A family member for 4 alien children and their determined mother. The Kraven would return eventually. Other threats would emerge, but Sarah would be ready. And, more importantly, she'd make sure the next generation was ready too. That was purpose. That was meaning. That was why she'd survived when others hadn't. Not to carry guilt forever, but to use every hard-won lesson to protect those who came after. Nivra tugged on her hand. "Can we review the strike operations? I want to understand the coordination patterns better." Sarah smiled and led the princesses toward the tactical displays. Behind them, Saveth watched with quiet satisfaction. The life debt had been paid and surpassed. What remained now was family, purpose, and the future. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chen was ready to face all three.